Next, we will move on to Meghan Vankosky, a field crop entomologist at the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Saskatoon Research and Development Centre. Her research program focuses on studying the biology and population ecology of insect pests and their natural enemies in order to inform pest management practices. She is chair of the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network, a group of entomologists on the prairies that coordinates and conducts annual surveys of key insect pests of cereals, oilseeds, and pulses, and provides weekly updates and annual risk and distribution maps to farmers, agronomists, researchers, and other agricultural stakeholders. And her presentation today is entitled Shifting Insect Pests, Host Population Dynamics and Distribution Across Time.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel discussion this afternoon. My name is Dr. Meghan Vankosky, and I'm an entomologist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, located in Saskatoon. A major aspect of my research program focuses on understanding pest population dynamics, including forecasting pest outbreaks and understanding changes in pest distribution over time and space. So today I'm going to talk about the pea-leaf weevil, which is an invasive species in Western Canada. So I'm going to quickly go through the biology and invasion history of this pest, talk about a species distribution model that was developed for it, go over the history of its spread through the prairies, and then talk about some of the factors that might be influencing that spread. So as I mentioned, this is an invasive species to Western Canada. It is a weevil that feeds on field peas and faba beans as its primary host. And you can see in the pictures here an example of what the feeding damage by the adults looks like. The adults emerge from their overwintering sites in the spring, and then they disperse into field pea and faba bean fields. Once they reach the fields and start feeding on these hosts, then they begin laying eggs, and the eggs develop inside the root nodules of these host plants as the larvae. And then the larvae pupate in the soil, with the new generation of adults emerging in late July and into August. And these new generation adults continue to feed on any green material that they can find, and then eventually move to their overwintering sites. Over time, this weevil has invaded Canada and the United States. And so it was first detected in Canada and in North America in the 1930s in British Columbia. And from there, it actually moved south into the Pacific Northwest. And in the 1990s, was detected in Alberta. After its detection in Alberta in the southwest corner of the province, it began to move east and then invaded Saskatchewan in 2007 and North Dakota in 2016. So we have seen that this insect has been quite successful in being able to expand its range where field pea and faba beans are grown. My colleagues, Owen Olfert et al., developed a species distribution model for pea-leaf weevil that was published in 2012. This is a model that is, we refer to these models as bioclimate models. So it basically is a melding of the basic biology of the insect pest with its known distribution, and then the climate of that particular area. So the model is developed for the area of origin, and then it can be projected onto the area of invasion, in order to predict where the species is most likely to become established over time. So the map that is shown here is a bioclimate model for pea-leaf weevil developed using a program called CLIMEX that was developed in Europe and then projected onto North America to estimate where this species would do the best as it continues to invade North America. So if we focus on Canada, and this is a model based on current climate in 2012, so a 30-year climate normal data set spanning 2012. So this model predicts that the red areas on the map are highly favorable for its establishment. And what we would see is that the weevil would do very well in kind of the red deer area and north of that in Alberta, with some pockets in Saskatchewan where it would do quite well, and then also into the southeast area of Manitoba. And so the color scheme is the same on all of the maps that I'll be showing in terms of species distribution models, where red indicates areas that are highly favorable for the species to establish, and the light blue areas are where the climate conditions are not ideal for the species to establish and reproduce. So over time, we've seen that the pea-leaf weevil distribution in Western Canada has expanded. And so I have a series of maps to show here that are all based on an annual survey conducted by the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and now into Manitoba. And so on each of these maps, the red areas are where we have detected fairly high population densities of the pea-leaf weevil, and green areas are fairly low densities of pea-leaf weevil. And this survey is based on damage to the plants detected in the spring. So we conduct this survey in late May to early June, when field pea plants are in about the 2 to 6 node stage of their development. And we go out and we count the number of notches on each plant, and we use the number of notches as an estimate of population density, as we know that the more weevils there are in a field, the more damage we'll find on the plants. So this map is not a direct estimate of population density, but it does represent the amount of damage that we're seeing in the fields. So I start here with 2007, which is the first year that pea-leaf weevils were detected in Saskatchewan, and move through to 2011, where we see that we've expanded our survey north and east in order to take in the expected expansion of the species. And so by 2011, we're seeing weevil damage further east into Saskatchewan, but also for lower levels of damage further north into Alberta. By 2016, with a 5-year jump, we're seeing that there is a fairly established population in the red deer area, as well as some low population density fields further north into Edmonton. And again, we're seeing this eastern spread into Saskatchewan. By 2017, we were able to expand our area of survey in Saskatchewan into the Saskatoon area, because we did have weevils detected in the Saskatoon area in 2016. So even though the damage that we were seeing was low, they were present, and now present all the way really to the Manitoba border. And again, we're seeing more weevil damage in that red deer and Edmonton area, shifting north, as the species distribution model predicted that we would see with our current climate. And the final map I'm going to show is from 2019, where again, we see that there is a fairly well-established low population density grouping of fields in the northern Alberta or north central Alberta area. Also now we're seeing fairly consistently low levels of damage in the Peace River region around Grande Prairie. Now, in between 2017 and 2019, we do see quite a significant decline in damage in the fields, suggesting that the population densities or the populations have crashed. And this could be due to a few different things, but the point of this map is really still to show that there's this fairly healthy population in this north central part of Alberta, which is where the species distribution model, and I'll go back to that right now, showed that we would be seeing the population or this particular invasive species become established over time. So, as we've seen from the maps, we have seen that over time, the population distribution of the pea-leaf weevil in Alberta and Saskatchewan has really shifted into the area that our bioclimate model predicted it would. which is really quite interesting to see. And I think it quite validates the modeling process that we've used to make these predictions before the weevils were actually present. We are just now starting to see populations of pea-leaf weevil in Manitoba. So they are kind of in the western central area, the Swan River Valley area. So they are becoming established there. And over the next few years, it will be interesting to see if their populations continue to move east and south into the areas of the map that are colored red in the southeastern corner of Manitoba. But we did see between 2016 and 2019 a population collapse of pea-leaf weevil as well. And so I'd like to talk about that for a minute in terms of some of the other types of predictions that we made with the bioclimate model that Olfert et al. Published in 2012. And so one of the things that they did with the model is once the model was created and validated using the original distribution of the pest in Europe and Africa, then they projected it to North America, but they also ran some sensitivity analysis where they looked at different changes to climate or different changes to the weather over time to see how that might affect pea-leaf weevil distribution as well. And so the two scenarios here show what we would expect to see for the distribution and establishment of pea-leaf weevil populations with 40% less precipitation than in the current climate and with 40% more precipitation compared to the current climate. And in the 40% less scenario, we see much less area on the map shaded in orange and red, which if you recall, orange and red are favorable for population establishment. And so we can conclude that drier growing conditions are probably going to result in lower population densities of pea-leaf weevil. And we really have seen that on the prairies in the last few years, where between 2016 and 2017, we had very healthy weevil populations. After a dry year in 2018, we've seen actually quite low populations ever since then. So precipitation, we predicted, would be a fairly strong driver of establishment of this particular invasive species, and we're seeing that in the field. The final thing I'm just going to touch on briefly is that once these species distribution models or bioclimate models have been created and validated, we can also make predictions about future climate. And so this map represents where we expect the pea-leaf weevil to be able to establish and have healthy populations that probably would result in economic yield loss in those red areas for a future climate scenario with the projections for climate for 2080. So in this particular case, we continue to see that shift north, including into more of northern British Columbia, somewhat into the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, and shifting also up into Alaska. So this assumes that the host plants would be able to grow in those areas as well, but it does show that interesting things could happen with this particular population as our climate continues to change. And over time, not that we'll necessarily be around in 2080, we could also look back on our historical data in order to validate these models and see if what we predicted actually comes true. So I guess to summarize quickly, the pea-leaf weevil is an invasive pest in North America. We have a bioclimate model that is published that predicts where the species could become established in the current growing region of Western Canada. And we've seen that over time, the population has really shifted into those particular areas where we expected, or where the model predicted, that the weevil would do quite well and be able to maintain a reproductive population. We've also been able to use the model to make some conclusions or reach some conclusions about what particular factors might be affecting changes in their population between growing seasons, and have made some projections about what could happen with the distribution of this particular species as the climate continues to change. So thank you so much for your attention this afternoon. I'd also like to acknowledge the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network, which conducts an annual survey for pea leaf weevil, which I used here to demonstrate how our model has really predicted what has actually happened. And also like to thank the funders who have supported the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network and some of our other research programs over time. So thank you again for your attention, and I look forward to fielding questions during the panel later this afternoon.